I stood in the darkened hallway of my own home, holding my breath as I watched the live feed on my phone screen. Just on the other side of the door, in the brightly lit kitchen, my mother-in-law, Beatrice, was spooning oatmeal into my 3-year-old son's mouth. My son has a highly documented, lethally severe peanut allergy. 3 weeks ago, Beatrice had used his social security number to secretly take out a $4 million life insurance policy on him, listing herself as the sole beneficiary. Today, while my husband was at work, she insisted on babysitting. I had watched her through the hidden nanny cam as she pulled a jar of peanut butter from her oversized purse, stirred a massive scoop into his bowl, and then deliberately took his emergency EpiPen and threw it into the garbage disposal. She thought I was at a corporate retreat, entirely oblivious. She thought she was about to watch my child go into anaphylactic shock, fake a panicked 911 call, and walk away a millionaire. She didn't know that last night I had snuck into her house, found the jar of peanut butter she was preparing, and completely replaced the contents with a perfectly safe, allergy-friendly sunflower seed butter. And she certainly didn't know that the 2 large men standing silently behind me in the hallway weren't movers. They were homicide detectives from the Major Crimes Unit. On the screen, Beatrice checked her watch, looking confused as to why my son was happily eating and not struggling to breathe. My hands were steady. That surprised me later when I thought back on it. I would have expected them to shake. I need to go back 8 months, to the moment I first understood that something in my son's world had gone quietly, catastrophically wrong. Leo was diagnosed with his peanut allergy at 14 months old. After a birthday party incident that still visits me in nightmares, his lips swelling, his breath turning to a thin, terrible whistle. The ambulance ride where a paramedic looked at me and said calmly, professionally, the words that rearranged my entire nervous system permanently. This is one of the most severe reactions I've seen in a child this age. If you'd waited another 5 minutes, we'd be having a different conversation. After that, our house became a fortress of vigilance. No peanut products crossed our threshold. I read every label twice. I carried 2 EpiPens everywhere, always, the way other mothers carried snacks or wet wipes. I taught every daycare worker, every teacher, every babysitter the signs, the hives, the swelling, the wheeze, until reciting them became as automatic as breathing. My husband, Grant, was supportive in the beginning, in the way people are supportive when a crisis is fresh and frightening and hasn't yet become a permanent, exhausting condition of daily life. But Grant had a particular weakness that I hadn't fully understood until we'd been married 3 years, and that weakness had a name: his mother. Beatrice Whitfield was the kind of woman who mistook control for love and never once, in my presence, seemed to notice the difference. She had raised Grant and his 2 siblings, Denise and Todd, with an iron sense of obligation. You owed your family. She often said everything forever, no matter what it cost you, and both Denise and Todd had absorbed that lesson in the worst possible way. Denise's husband had left her with 3 kids and a mountain of credit card debt 18 months ago. Todd had lost his restaurant to a bankruptcy filing that same year, after a business partner drained the accounts and vanished to Mexico. Beatrice, I would come to learn, had spent those 18 months writing checks to both of them that she absolutely could not afford, quietly liquidating a retirement account that had once been substantial and was now, according to documents I'd find much later, nearly gone. She never mentioned any of this to me. I only learned the scope of it after everything came apart, when the financial records became evidence in a case file. At the time, all I knew was that Beatrice had grown strange around Leo in a way I couldn't name but felt, viscerally, every time she walked through our door. It started small, a comment here, a lingering look there. She began asking to babysit more often, which, on its face, seemed like nothing. Grandmothers wanted time with their grandchildren. I told myself that for longer than I should have. But the questions were what finally cracked something open in me. So if he ate something with peanuts in it, Beatrice asked one Sunday afternoon, watching Leo stack blocks on the living room rug with an expression I initially mistook for grandmotherly fondness. How fast would it actually happen? Like minutes? Seconds? It varies, I said carefully, because this wasn't an unreasonable question for a caregiver to ask. I'd fielded versions of it from every daycare worker we'd ever had. Sometimes symptoms start within minutes. Sometimes it can take a little longer to become severe. And the pen thing. She gestured vaguely toward the diaper bag where Leo's EpiPen lived permanently in a designated pocket. How does that actually work? Does it save him every time or? It buys time, I said. It's not a guarantee. That's why we call 911 immediately no matter what, even after using it. Huh, Beatrice said and went back to watching Leo stack his blocks, and I remember standing in my own kitchen doorway with a strange, cold feeling crawling up the back of my neck that I couldn't yet name, because naming it felt insane. She's your husband's mother, I told myself. She loves him. This is just an old woman being curious, maybe even anxious, about a medical condition she doesn't fully understand. I told myself that for 3 more months, through at least half a dozen more conversations that followed the same unsettling pattern. Casual, specific, clinical questions about timing, about dosage, about exactly how long it would take for an ambulance to arrive from our house versus hers, delivered in the same tone she used to ask about recipe substitution. It was Grant who finally made me say the word out loud, though not intentionally. I mentioned it to him one night tentatively, testing the shape of my own suspicion. Your mom asks a lot of questions about Leo's allergy, specific ones. It's starting to feel strange. Grant didn't even look up from his laptop. She's worried about him, Clara. She loves that kid. You're being a little paranoid, don't you think? I don't think I am. She's 68 years old and her biggest hobby is babysitting her grandson. I think you're reading into things because you've been under a lot of stress. He said it gently, the way you'd say something to someone you believed was being unreasonable but didn't want to fight about it. And I remember sitting there on the edge of our bed feeling the particular, isolating loneliness of being told, kindly, lovingly, dismissively, that my instincts couldn't be trusted. I let it go for a while. I told myself Grant knew his mother better than I did, that 28 years of history counted for something, that maybe I really was projecting my own trauma from that first terrifying hospital visit onto an old woman's clumsy expressions of concern. But mothers know things. I've come to believe that with a kind of certainty I can't fully explain to people who haven't felt it. A low, constant, wordless frequency running underneath every interaction with your child, picking up signals your conscious mind hasn't caught up to yet. And that frequency, every single time Beatrice reached for Leo's diaper bag, every time she asked another quiet, clinical question about timing and dosage, and how long an ambulance ride took from her house, was screaming at me. Something was wrong. I didn't have proof. I didn't have a name for it yet. But 3 weeks later, a thick envelope from a life insurance company I'd never heard of arrived in our mailbox, addressed, strangely, to Leo. And everything after that stopped being a feeling and started being evidence. The envelope sat on our kitchen counter for 2 days before I opened it, mostly because it was addressed to Leo Whitfield in a way that seemed like an obvious clerical error, junk mail, a marketing mistake, some algorithm that had scraped his name off a hospital registration form and decided a 3-year-old needed a subscription offer. I opened it on a Tuesday morning while Leo napped, expecting nothing. It was a policy confirmation letter from a company called Meridian Life and Casualty, addressed to Leo, referencing a whole life insurance policy with a face value of $4 million, policy effective date 6 weeks prior, beneficiary designation on file. I read it twice before the words rearranged themselves into something I could actually process. $4 million on a 3-year-old. With a designated beneficiary that, per the letter's formatting, was not me and was not Grant. My hands were shaking too badly to dial correctly the first time. I called Meridian's customer service line and sat on hold for 11 minutes, my heart slamming against my ribs so hard I could hear it, before a representative confirmed, after I'd verified Leo's information 3 separate times, that yes, a policy had been taken out on Leo Whitfield 6 weeks prior, that the policyholder's information listed a woman named Beatrice Whitfield as both the policy purchaser and sole beneficiary, and that per standard underwriting for a policy of this size. The purchaser had provided Leo's full legal name, date of birth, and social security number to complete the application. How, I said, and I remember my voice coming out strange, flattened, how does someone take out an insurance policy on a child who isn't theirs? Doesn't that require parental consent? The representative's tone shifted, apologetic in the careful way of someone reading from a script designed to manage liability. Typically, a policy on a minor requires consent from a parent or legal guardian, Or in some cases, a grandparent can qualify as an authorized applicant under certain state provisions if they can demonstrate an insurable interest and provide the required documentation. I'd need to pull the full file to see exactly what was submitted. An insurable interest. I sat with that phrase for a long time after I hung up the phone, turning it over, understanding with a slow, sick clarity that somewhere in the mountain of paperwork Grant's family generated, school forms, medical releases, the birthday party sign-in sheet from 3 years ago where every guardian had listed emergency contact information, Beatrice had found what she needed. A social security number. A birth certificate copy. Something. I didn't tell Grant that night. I want to be honest about why. I was afraid, for the first time in our marriage, that if I told him, he would go straight to his mother, and she would have time to explain it away. Some story about wanting to save for Leo's college. Some elaborate, plausible lie that would let Grant fold his suspicion back into the comfortable shape of denial he'd been living in for months. I needed proof he couldn't argue with. I ordered a micro camera online that night, the kind marketed for nanny surveillance. Small enough to sew into a stuffed animal without altering its shape. 2 days later, working alone at the kitchen table after Leo went to bed, I split the seam along the back of his favorite teddy bear, a worn brown thing named Bumble that went everywhere with him, including, I now made sure, every visit to his grandmother's house, and nested the camera behind the stuffing, angled outward through a small gap I disguised in the fabric. I felt like a criminal doing it. I remember that specifically, the strange, vertiginous guilt of surveilling my own family, my hands cold, my mind running through every possible innocent explanation even as I threaded the needle. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe this was paranoia, exactly like Grant said. Maybe I'd find nothing on that footage except an old woman playing with her grandson, and I'd feel ashamed of myself for a long time afterward. And that shame would be worth it, because it would mean Leo was safe. I dropped Leo at Beatrice's house that Thursday for what was supposed to be a 2-hour visit, while I ran errands I didn't actually need to run. I sat in my car in a grocery store parking lot 4 blocks away, watching a live feed on my phone that showed, for the first 90 minutes, exactly the innocent scene I'd half hoped for. Beatrice reading to him. Beatrice helping him build a block tower. Beatrice laughing at something he said, a sound that seemed infuriatingly, completely genuine. Then Leo went down for his afternoon nap, and Beatrice carried Bumble, carried the camera, carried my proof, into the kitchen and set him on the counter, propped against the fruit bowl facing the room. I watched my mother-in-law walk to the counter where Leo's diaper bag sat, unzip the front medical pocket, and remove his EpiPen. She turned it over in her hands, studying it from every angle the way you'd study an unfamiliar tool. Then she read the printed instructions on the side, slowly, her lips moving slightly, the way people read something they intend to remember. Then, and this is the moment that stopped my breath entirely, sitting in that parking lot with the phone gripped so hard my knuckles ached, she gripped the pen in both hands and made a small, testing motion, a twist, a snap-like gesture, stopping just short of actually breaking it, as though she were rehearsing exactly how much force it would take. She did this 3 times. Each time she glanced toward the hallway where Leo slept, checking, I understood with a horror that seemed to physically drop through my stomach that he wasn't awake to see. Then she wrapped the pen back in its case, returned it to the exact pocket she'd taken it from, zipped the bag closed, and sat down at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, her expression settling into something perfectly serene, perfectly grandmotherly, as though she hadn't just spent 4 minutes rehearsing how to destroy the one device standing between her grandson and death. I sat in that parking lot for a long time after the feed cut to Beatrice simply drinking her tea. I don't know how long. Long enough that a grocery store employee collecting carts tapped on my window to ask if I was all right, and I realized my face was wet and I hadn't noticed myself crying. I picked Leo up an hour later. Beatrice hugged him goodbye at the door, told him she loved him more than anything in this whole world, and I stood there holding my son's small hand and looking at this woman I had spent 6 years trying to love, understanding for the first time that I was looking at someone capable of watching a child die for money. I didn't tell Grant that night either. I lay awake instead, running the numbers in my head the way I imagined Beatrice had run them in hers. $4 million, split presumably 3 ways or kept whole for herself. enough to erase Denise's debt and rebuild Todd's restaurant and buy herself out of whatever quiet desperation had been eating her alive for 18 months. Enough, apparently, to be worth more than her own grandson's life. 3 days later, I finally worked up the courage to raise it with Grant. Carefully, gently, laying the insurance letter on the table between us like evidence at a trial I already suspected I might lose. He read it twice. His face went through several expressions in quick succession: confusion, then something that looked almost like the beginning of alarm, and then, infuriatingly, a kind of practiced retreat back toward denial that I recognized because I'd watched him do it a dozen times before with his mother's behavior. "There has to be an explanation," he said. "Maybe it's for a college fund. Maybe it's some kind of, I don't know, a burial policy, some old-fashioned thing she read about. Grant, it's $4 million on a 3-year-old, with her as the sole beneficiary." "I'll talk to her," he said, which was, I realized with a sinking, isolating certainty, precisely the wrong thing to do and precisely what I'd been afraid he'd say. If he confronted her now, she'd have time. She'd construct an explanation. She'd delay, or worse, she'd accelerate, moving faster than we could prepare for once she understood we suspected her. I didn't show him the EpiPen footage that night. I told myself I would soon, once I had a plan that didn't depend on hoping my husband would choose his son over his mother in a moment that mattered. Because some quiet, cold part of my brain, the same frequency that had been screaming at me for months, had already started calculating something else entirely. If Beatrice was rehearsing, she wasn't finished planning, which meant there was still time, but not much of it. I didn't sleep the night after Grant said, "I'll talk to her." I lay in the dark, running through every version of what could go wrong if he did, and by 4 a.m. I had made a decision that felt less like a choice and more like the only door left standing in a burning hallway. I wasn't going to wait for my husband to protect our son. I was going to do it myself, through channels Beatrice couldn't charm or manipulate or explain her way out of. The next morning, after Grant left for work, I called the non-emergency line for the Major Crimes Unit and asked, carefully, how to report a suspected planned attempt on a child's life. I was transferred twice before I reached a detective named Marcus Feldon, a broad, quiet man in his 50s who listened to my entire account without interrupting once. The insurance letter, the EpiPen footage, 8 months of clinical questions about timing and dosage disguised as grandmotherly concern. When I finished, he was silent for a moment. "Mrs. Whitfield, I want to be honest with you. What you've described is deeply concerning, but on its own, it may not be enough to secure an arrest warrant. An insurance policy, even a large one, isn't illegal by itself. Rehearsing with a medical device isn't a crime. We'd need to catch an overt act, something that demonstrates clear intent to harm, not just preparation." "So I wait until she actually feeds him peanuts," I said, and I heard my own voice come out sharper than I intended, "and hope you get there in time." "No," Feldon said, "that's not what I'm suggesting. I'm suggesting we build the trap ourselves on our terms, where we control the variables and your son is never actually at risk." He explained it over the following 2 days, working alongside a colleague from the DA's office and a caseworker from Child Protective Services, who reviewed the footage and the insurance documents with a grim, focused efficiency that made me trust her almost immediately. The plan, once assembled, was simple in concept and terrifying in practice. Beatrice had, per a text message Clara had intercepted from Grant's phone with a guilt she'd examined some other day, already purchased a jar of peanut butter. An unusual detail, since our family famously kept it entirely out of both households, and one that read, in retrospect, like a woman quietly assembling a murder weapon under the cover of ordinary grocery shopping. Detective Feldon's team confirmed it through a warrant on her recent purchase history. A jar of peanut butter, bought 4 days after the EpiPen footage, at a store nowhere near her usual grocery route. A small, deliberate act of concealment that told me she'd thought about being seen. The plan required an overt act captured cleanly enough to prosecute. Feldon's team couldn't manufacture that act. Entrapment laws were specific about who could set a trap and how. But if Beatrice was already planning to feed Leo something dangerous on her own initiative, and law enforcement simply positioned themselves to witness and immediately intervene, that wasn't entrapment. That was surveillance of a crime already in motion. which meant Leo could never actually be allowed to eat what Beatrice intended to serve him. 3 nights before the babysitting session, Beatrice had specifically requested, an oddly insistent request, made twice in one phone call, for a full afternoon alone with Leo while Grant and I attended what she believed was a corporate retreat. I did something I'm still not entirely at peace with, even now. I used the spare key Beatrice had given us years ago, back when things were simpler, back when I still believed her concern for our family was uncomplicated. I let myself into her house at 11 p.m., Grant asleep at home believing I'd gone to help a coworker with a moving emergency. And I found the jar of peanut butter exactly where the purchase warrant said it would be, tucked behind a row of canned soup in a cabinet Beatrice clearly didn't expect anyone else to open. I'd brought a jar of allergy-safe sunflower seed butter, purchased with cash 3 states worth of caution earlier that week, packaged in an unlabeled container specifically so I could decant it. Working by the light of my phone in a dark kitchen that wasn't mine, hands shaking for the first time in days, I emptied Beatrice's peanut butter into a sealed bag I'd brought for exactly this purpose, preserved, per Felden's explicit instruction as evidence of purchase and intent, and refilled the original jar with the sunflower seed butter instead, matching the texture and color as closely as I could, resealing the lid so it looked untouched. I stood in her kitchen for a moment afterward in the dark, looking at that jar sitting innocently on the counter where I'd need to leave it, and felt something I hadn't expected to feel in that house. A strange, ferocious calm. Whatever happened in 3 days, my son would not be harmed by what was inside that jar. That much, at least, I had already made certain of with my own hands, before anyone else got the chance to fail him. I let myself out the way I came, locked the door behind me, and drove home through empty streets with the confiscated peanut butter riding in a cooler bag on the passenger seat like something radioactive. The next 2 days were the longest of my life. Felden's team fitted our house, and, with a separately obtained warrant based on the insurable interest fraud alone, portions of Beatrice's house, with additional surveillance to supplement Bumble's hidden camera, which I'd retrieve and reposition for the day itself. 2 detectives would be stationed in an unmarked vehicle a block from Beatrice's house, with a third, Felden himself, positioned inside a utility van close enough to intervene within seconds if anything moved faster than anticipated. Grant, still operating under the belief that this was simply a normal, if slightly overdue, babysitting visit, left for work that morning without any idea that his mother was about to be arrested for attempted murder, or that his wife had spent the last 4 days building the exact case that would prove it. I hadn't told him. I want to be honest about the weight of that choice because it wasn't easy, and it wasn't without cost to something between us that I suspected, even then, might not fully recover. But every version of the plan that included telling Grant in advance also included a version of Grant hesitating, second-guessing, warning his mother in some small unconscious way, a nervous phone call, a strange look, anything that might spook a woman who had spent 8 months planning this with meticulous, patient care. I needed Beatrice to walk into that kitchen believing completely that no one was watching. The morning of the babysitting session, I dropped Leo off at 9 a.m., told Beatrice I had an early flight to catch for the retreat, and watched her take my son's hand at the door with a warmth in her face that, for the first time in 8 months, didn't confuse me at all. I understood exactly what it was now. Not love, anticipation. "Have a wonderful trip, dear," she said, and I made myself smile, made myself hug her, made myself walk back to my car with steady, unhurried steps even though every cell in my body was screaming to turn around and grab my son back into my arms. I drove 3 blocks, parked behind the unmarked surveillance vehicle, and climbed into the back seat next to Detective Felden, my phone already syncing to Bumble's live feed. "You don't have to watch this part," Felden said quietly, glancing at me. "Yes," I said, my eyes already fixed on the screen, on my son's small shape settling onto Beatrice's kitchen floor to play, entirely unaware that he was the most closely guarded 3-year-old in the state of Ohio that morning. "I do." I watched my mother-in-law reach into her oversized purse at 11:52 a.m. and pull out the jar of peanut butter, my peanut butter now, though she didn't know that, and felt Detective Felden go very still beside me in the back seat of the surveillance van. "Here we go," he said quietly into a radio clipped to his collar. All units stand by. On the screen, Beatrice set the jar on the counter and began preparing Leo's lunch with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had rehearsed this exact sequence of motions many times in her head. Oatmeal warmed on the stove. A generous, deliberate scoop of the peanut butter, sunflower seed butter. Harmless, inert, though her face carried the same careful, clinical focus it would have carried for the real thing, stirred thoroughly into the bowl until no trace of it was visible. Then she did the thing that made my stomach drop even though I'd known it was coming, even though I'd watched her rehearse an approximation of it 3 weeks earlier through this same camera. She walked to Leo's diaper bag, unzipped the medical pocket, removed his EpiPen and carried it to the sink. She ran the garbage disposal for exactly 4 seconds. When she lifted her hand away, the pen was gone. She wiped her hands on a dish towel, straightened her blouse, and carried the bowl of oatmeal to the table where Leo sat in his booster seat, swinging his feet, chattering about something I couldn't quite hear through the audio feed's distance from him. "She just destroyed his emergency medication," I said, my voice coming out strange and flat in my own ears. "Detective, we're moving," Felden said, already opening the van door. Now, I don't remember the run from the van to Beatrice's front door with any real clarity. I remember cold air and my own heartbeat and Felden's hand briefly on my shoulder, positioning me slightly behind him and another detective as they approached, weapons holstered but hands ready, moving with the fast, controlled urgency of people who did this for a living, and had done it 1,000 times before. Through the front window, I could see Beatrice sitting across from Leo, watching him lift the first spoonful of oatmeal to his mouth with an expression I will remember, I think, for the rest of my life. Not concern, not affection, but a kind of cold, patient expectancy, the look of someone watching a pot come to boil. Leo ate it. Nothing happened, of course, because there was nothing in that bowl that could hurt him. He kept eating, unbothered, chattering, entirely unaware that he was, in that exact moment, the safest and most surveilled child in the county. Beatrice checked her watch, frowned slightly, checked it again a full minute later, her expression shifting from patient expectancy into something closer to confusion, then unease, watching her grandson eat an entire bowl of peanut butter oatmeal with absolutely no reaction at all. That confusion was still on her face when Felden kicked the door open. I have relived the next 90 seconds more times than I can count, and it never loses its strange, dreamlike clarity. Beatrice's spoon, her own spoon, the one she'd used to stir the poison into my son's food, slipping from her fingers and clattering against the table. Her chair scraping back as she rose halfway, mouth already forming the beginning of some explanation she never got the chance to finish. 2 detectives flanking her before she'd taken a single step, one hand closing firmly around her upper arm, the other producing handcuffs with a practiced, unhurried motion that felt, after 8 months of watching this woman calmly plan my son's death, almost obscenely gentle for what she deserved. I didn't wait for permission. I crossed the kitchen in 4 steps and lifted Leo out of his booster seat, pulling him against my chest so hard he made a small, surprised sound of protest. His little hands still sticky with oatmeal, entirely oblivious to the fact that he had just survived, unknowingly, the second attempt on his life in 8 months. "Clara," Beatrice started, her voice climbing towards something desperate now, something that might have almost sounded to a stranger like genuine bewilderment. "Clara, I don't understand what's happening. I would never." "We found the real jar in her purse," one of the detectives called from across the kitchen, holding up an evidence bag containing the original peanut butter I'd removed 4 nights earlier, still sealed, still labeled, still exactly what it was. "And the EpiPens in pieces in the disposal trap. We're good." Felden read Beatrice her rights, while she was still processing the fact that the child she'd expected to be gasping for air on the kitchen floor was instead standing calmly in his mother's arms, watching the whole scene with the mild, uncomprehending curiosity of a 3-year-old who didn't yet understand that the woman being led out to a patrol car in handcuffs had spent the last 8 months planning to kill him for $4 million. Grant arrived at the precinct 2 hours later, having been called off a client meeting by a phone call that must have detonated his entire understanding of his family in the space of a single sentence. I watched him walk into the waiting area, his face gray, his hands shaking in a way I'd never once seen in 6 years of marriage, and some small, tired part of me almost felt sorry for him. Clara, I had no idea. I swear to God I had no idea if I'd known. You told me I was paranoid, I said, and I kept my voice level because I had promised myself, sitting in that surveillance van, that whatever happened next, I would not scream, I would not shatter. I would simply be exactly as calm and exact as I'd needed to be for the last 8 months. You told your mother's word was worth more than my instincts about my own son. I asked you to believe me, Grant, and instead I had to build a federal case by myself, alone, while you were at work not believing your wife. I'll fix this, he said. I'll never speak to her again. You don't get to fix this, I said. I already did. I filed for divorce 11 days later, along with an emergency custody petition and a protective order that named both Beatrice pending trial, though everyone involved understood she would never again be permitted near Leo regardless of its outcome. And at my attorney's careful recommendation, given his documented pattern of dismissing credible threats to his son's safety, Grant himself, at least until a family court could evaluate what kind of unsupervised access, if any, made sense going forward, Beatrice was charged with attempted first-degree murder, insurance fraud, and identity theft for using Leo's social security number without consent. The trial, framed almost entirely around the footage from a stuffed bear named Bumble, lasted 6 days. The jury took 90 minutes to convict her on every count. She was sentenced to life in a maximum security facility with the possibility of parole after 25 years, by which point Leo would be a grown man who, I have promised myself, will know exactly what his grandmother tried to do to him, and exactly what his mother did to stop her. I got full custody. I moved us into a smaller house across town, one with no history in it, no oversized purses hiding jars of poison, no grandmothers timing spoonfuls with a stopwatch running silently behind kind eyes. Leo is 5 now. He still carries an EpiPen everywhere, in a small backpack shaped like a dinosaur that he picked out himself. And he still doesn't fully understand why his grandmother isn't in his life anymore. And someday I will have to find the words to explain it to him in a way a child can hold. But every night when I check on him before bed and watch him sleep with Bumble tucked under one arm, the same bear, the camera long since removed, just an ordinary stuffed animal again now, I think about the 4 seconds I watched Beatrice run that garbage disposal. And I think about the woman I used to be before that morning, the one who might have talked herself out of trusting her own instincts. She never gets another chance, neither does anyone else.